At the advent of the Wii, Red Steel was a game that wanted to revolutionize the FPS genre, using the then innovative motion controls of Nintendo's newly announced console. However, the dream of being able to realistically swordplay in a one-to-one fashion fell flat at the hand of awkward controls and clunky pre-canned animations, concessioned by the de-glitzed motion capabilities of the Wii Remote. 4 years and one peripheral later, Red Steel 2 takes its shot to provide the gunslinging sword-fighting action craved from its predecessor. Can the dream of motion-controlled sword fighting finally become reality, or is it better not to cross blades with this sword slinger?
So, you've come to save us all.
It's nice to see you too.
Welcome to Caldera, a town of pistols, swords, and samurais currently under the gun and blade of a brutal gang of thugs called Jackals. You assume the role of a nameless hero, referred to only by his former clan's name, Kusagari. After being dragged back to town quite unceremoniously, and literally, Kusagari takes the initiative to dish out righteous justice by way of bullets and steel, along the way extracting revenge on those responsible for the slaughtering of his clansmen, and discovering the true motivations of the villain so keen to put an end to his life.
I'm freaking dead, man! You hear me? Dead! I'm gonna split you in half!
Aside from a few cutscenes very early in the game, our hero is one of the silent types, allowing most of the game's backstory and sparse details of his own history to be shared somewhat clumsily by other characters in the game.
Seen plenty of Kusagari before, but not you. You a Boy Scout or something?
Most of these events take place in pre-rendered cutscenes, precursing key events throughout the game's progression. Outside of these cutscenes, interactivity with side characters is almost completely absent, which, when combined with the totally barren towns and vistas, can leave the game's narrative feeling left on the back burner, even more so later in the game when the development of noteworthy events lay seemingly forgotten by the end credits roll. When in bullet points, Red Steel 2 has the makings of an engaging narrative, so it's a shame the final effort comes off mostly rudimentary. You won't be offended by the quality of the story, just don't come expecting much of a groundbreaking experience. Rather than a strictly point A to point B design prevalent in many first-person shooters, Red Steel 2 places you in a large level, with sectioned areas of the map closed off until you progress the game's story to a certain point by completing objective-based missions. The game's main story will have you slicing and dicing down plenty of enemy-filled paths, and can provide enough variety to the experience overall to keep the momentum moving forward, though some of the game's secondary missions outside of the core campaign tend to drag as objectives directing you to kill that group of thugs, blow those trucks up, or activate these radio antennas start to repeat themselves a little too often toward the latter part of the game.
But that explosion knocked out the primary comm tower. Get that tower back online, and we'll get her on the horn.
Despite this, the resulting composition creates the illusion of freedom by allowing you to wander the environment as you move from objective to objective, though when the game attempts to mask loading times within practically designed mechanical doors or odd character animations, illusionary open worlds can start to feel a little like interconnected rooms. Outside of the main campaign missions, there are a number of diversions to keep an eye out for, including crates and lockers to break open, safes to crack, as well as medallions and tokens, which provide money that can be used to upgrade your armament, combat techniques, or purchase accessories for more armor and health. It's a good incentive to keep you exploring the map, however the concept can become fatigued as crates and lockers constantly respawn anytime you exit and re-enter an area. You can expect that every mission will, in one way or another, put you on the foul end of an enemy's blade, which brings us to Red Steel 2's raison d'etre, motion-controlled combat. We've played plenty of games that had decent enough shooting controls, but not nearly as many that provided satisfying motion-controlled sword combat. The underlying design of guns and swords in the same game sounds compelling on paper, but can the execution work? You bet it can. Red Steel 2 is officially the first game to create a motion-controlled combat system that is functional, personal, and most importantly, just a blast to play with. Wii Motion Plus accurately allows the Wii Remote to pick up motions for individual and distinct attacks, from short jabs, quick swings, and heavy strikes. Half of the action is swinging your sword in free combat, while the other half is done using combat techniques activated by performing a series of actions. One technique, called the Eagle, is executed by holding down the A and B button for a second and swinging up with the controller. This launches your quarry into the air, after which you can either jump up for some truly ridiculous aerial attacks, or simply riddle him with holes from the ground. Blocking and parrying is done by holding the Wii Remote at the appropriate angle to block oncoming attacks. the angle of which you hold the remote being crucial to keeping enemies at bay, especially when facing off against multiple attackers, since enemies will have no problem ganging up on you and striking from behind. For the most part, the motion controls work great after you become accustomed to them, though it'll take a couple hours to figure out the limitations and the nuances before the experience becomes fluent. Once you train yourself to make intentional, deliberate strikes and fully embrace the various fighting techniques the combat system has to offer, you'll soon be dealing death by gun and blade handily and experiencing sword combat quite unlike anything you've played before. Just remember to rest your arm once in a while. You'll find a surprisingly fun and robust combat system in Red Steel 2 that will have you feeling appropriately awesome for about 10 hours, after which the game has pretty much showed you everything it has to offer. You can revisit chapters with all the upgrades and techniques obtained during your campaign playthrough via a challenge mode, but that's about it. It's amazing that Ubisoft didn't even at least have the game keep track of the number of sheriff badges and medallions you collect as you play through the game, as this at least would have added some much needed incentive to play through the game multiple times. As the game stands now with only a straightforward campaign, no multiplayer, and no other noteworthy extras or unlockables, you're pretty much in for a one-trick pony that offers little reason outside of its combat controls to go through the game more than twice, depending on what difficulty setting you start at. Visually, Red Steel 2 takes on a rather unique aesthetic by bringing samurais and cowboys together in a semi-techno East meets West cel-shaded art style. The stylized look of the game is simply stunning to behold, with striking colors and detail in both characters and the environment, lending itself seamlessly to the high-intensity action on screen. Some of the presentation's consistency slips a bit due to the slightly jarring pre-rendered cutscene transitions, but aside from the more expository movies, the action-packed cutscenes are entertaining to watch and lends more to the overall presentation than it detracts. The game's audio also lends a strong showing thanks in part to Tom Salta, whose rousing Eastern-Western musical mashup is always lingering in the ambience, whether you're fending off a mob of jackals or simply wandering the environment's wind-whistled alleyways. Aside from the score, guns go bang, swords go clang, and everything else in the middle sounds as it should, aside from a few lines of poorly written dialogue being delivered in a sorely emotionless fashion.
I think it was the way they were standing, like they were on guard duty or something.
Red Steel 2 may have some diminishing returns after a couple playthroughs due to a lackluster story and skimpy features, but it's bar none the best sword fighting action game in town that will engage you in a way few games have. The game builds an excellent case for the Wii Motion Plus and motion-controlled gaming in general, and any other titles of its type should consider it the current standard for motion-controlled design. This being said, it may be a bit of a stretch to recommend buying the game at full retail if you're a particularly frugal-minded person. But one way or another, if you own a Wii, you owe it to yourself to loosen up and experience the original dream of virtual sword fighting the way it was meant to be experienced.